In October 1929, Werner Heisenberg arrived in Kolkata. He had just won international recognition for one of the most unsettling discoveries in the history of science. 2 years earlier, he had formulated the uncertainty principle, the mathematical proof that the observer and the observed cannot be cleanly separated, that the act of measurement changes what is measured, that at the most fundamental level, nature is not a collection of definite things, it is a field of potentialities. The physics was confirmed, the equations were correct, and Heisenberg was deeply unsettled by what they meant. On the afternoon of October 4th, he visited the home of Rabindranath Tagore, Nobel Laureate, poet, and philosopher of the Indian tradition. They spoke for hours about science and Indian philosophy. 43 years later, Heisenberg described that afternoon to physicist Fritjof Capra. He said, "After the conversations about Indian philosophy, some of the ideas of quantum mechanics that had seemed so crazy suddenly made much more sense." This video is about what Heisenberg meant. Not that the Bhagavad Gita gave him the uncertainty principle. The uncertainty principle was formulated in 1927. The Tagore meeting was 1929. The sequence matters, and the record is clear. What Indian philosophy gave Heisenberg was something different and, in some ways, more significant. It gave him a map drawn by a tradition that had already investigated the territory quantum mechanics was now entering, and had described what it found with extraordinary philosophical precision. The Bhagavad Gita had already named the field that Heisenberg's equations described, had already identified the observer problem that his uncertainty principle revealed, had already prescribed a practice for directly recognizing what the mathematics could only point toward. The quantum mechanics was new. The territory was not. In 1958, Heisenberg published Physics and Philosophy. In Chapter 10, he wrote the sentence that every physicist since has had to reckon with. The atoms or the elementary particles themselves are not real. They form a world of potentialities or possibilities rather than one of things or facts. Read that again slowly. The particles are not real, not in the way the chair you are sitting in is real, not in the way your hand is real. They form a world of potentialities, a field of possibilities, not things, not facts. This was not a philosophical aside. It was Heisenberg's most considered statement about what quantum mechanics had actually discovered. And in the same book, in what may be the most important methodological statement any physicist has ever made, he wrote, "What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. The observer and the observed are not separate. The question shapes the answer. The measurement participates in what is measured." Two statements, both from the same physicist, both from the same book. The Bhagavad Gita had made both of them 2,500 years earlier. Chapter 11 of the Bhagavad Gita is unlike any other chapter in the text. For 10 chapters, Arjuna and Krishna have been in dialogue, Arjuna asking, Krishna teaching, the field described in language, Brahman explained through philosophy. In Chapter 11, language gives way to direct perception. Arjuna asks Krishna to show him what ordinary perception cannot reach, not the conceptual description of the field itself. Krishna responds, "Behold, now, Arjuna, the entire universe, with everything moving and non-moving, assembled here in my universal form. Whatever else you wish to see, behold it all within this form, but you cannot see my cosmic form with these physical eyes of yours. Therefore I grant you divine vision." Divine vision. Not a miracle in the supernatural sense. a shift in the level of perception, from the particle level, where Arjuna sees individual forms, individual people, individual objects, individual events on the battlefield, to the field level, where everything that appears separate is revealed as a single unified expression of one unmanifest ground. Now place Heisenberg beside this. Heisenberg's ordinary observation, the particle level, sees atoms and elementary particles as definite, separate, independently existing things. His equations revealed that this ordinary observation is wrong. The particles are not real in that sense. They form a world of potentialities. The definite, separate things are not what is actually there. What is actually there is a field of possibilities. What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. This is precisely the structure Chapter 11 describes. Arjuna's ordinary perception, his physical eyes, see the battlefield as a collection of definite separate things, armies, people, objects, events. The divine vision shows him that this perception is not wrong exactly, but incomplete. Beneath the apparent separateness, beneath the definite forms, is the field, the unmanifest ground, the world of potentialities, from which every definite form arises and into which every definite form returns. Heisenberg's equations describe this mathematically. Chapter 11 of the Bhagavad Gita showed it directly. There is a second Heisenberg convergence that is equally precise. The uncertainty principle does not merely say that our measurements are imprecise, it says something far more radical. The position and momentum of a particle cannot both be definite simultaneously, not because our instruments are not good enough, but because the definiteness itself depends on the act of observation. Before observation, the particle does not have a definite position. Observation does not reveal a pre-existing fact. Observation participates in creating the fact. Heisenberg stated this with complete clarity. What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. The Bhagavad Gita names this exact dynamic through the concept of Maya. Maya is not illusion in the sense of something that does not exist. It is the appearance of definite, separate, independently existing forms arising from the act of consciousness engaging with the field. The definite form, the particle in a definite position, arises through the act of observation. It is not there waiting to be found. It arises through the encounter between consciousness and the field. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, the Gita's concept of Maya. Two descriptions of the same dynamic, 2,500 years apart. When Heisenberg sat with Tagore in Kolkata in 1929, this is what he encountered. Not a tradition that had arrived at the same equations, not a culture that had anticipated his mathematics. A tradition that had investigated the same territory from a completely different direction, through direct inquiry into the nature of consciousness itself, and had mapped what it found with a precision that made his own discoveries feel less isolating, less crazy, less unprecedented. Heisenberg told Capra, he began to see that the recognition of relativity, interconnectedness, and impermanence as fundamental aspects of physical reality, which had been so difficult for himself and his fellow physicists, was the very basis of the Indian spiritual traditions. Two investigations, physics and contemplation, starting from opposite ends, arriving at the same recognition. The field is primary, the particles are secondary, the observer is not separate from the observed. Heisenberg also noted a parallel with a third framework. He wrote in Physics and Philosophy, I think that modern physics has definitively decided in favor of Plato. In fact, the smallest units of matter are not physical objects in the ordinary sense. They are forms, ideas, which can be expressed unambiguously only in mathematical language. Plato's forms, Heisenberg's potentialities, the Gita's unmanifest field. Three civilizations, three independent investigations of reality, all three arriving at the same structural conclusion. What is most real is not the definite visible particular. It is the unmanifest potential from which the particular arises. Here is the recognition both Heisenberg and the Gita are pointing toward. Right now, what you are observing, this voice, these words, is not nature itself. It is nature exposed to your method of questioning, to the particular instrument of awareness that you are bringing to this moment. The field from which this experience arises is not inside the experience. It is prior to the experience. The Bhagavad Gita calls it Brahman, the unmanifest ground, the world of potentialities before any particular act of observation collapses it into a specific experience. You are not the observer standing outside the field. The Gita's most radical claim, confirmed by Heisenberg's most radical finding, is that the observer and the field are not two separate things. The observer is the field appearing as a particular act of observation. The practice Arjuna underwent in Chapter 11 was not a visualization exercise. It was a shift in the instrument of perception, from the ordinary eyes that see only particles, only definite separate forms, to the vision that perceives the field from which the forms arise. The Gita calls this shift yoga, union, not union of two separate things. The recognition that the apparent separation was never real. Before the practice, rest for a moment in ordinary perception. Notice what you are aware of right now. Sounds, sensations, thoughts, each one appearing as a separate, definite thing. Now notice what they all have in common. Not their content, not their form, what they all arise within. The awareness in which every experience appears. This awareness does not change when the experiences change. It was present before this sentence began. It will be present after it ends. Heisenberg called what exists before observation a world of potentialities. The Gita calls it the unmanifest field, Brahman, the ground that grants Arjuna the divine vision. Notice that this awareness you are resting in right now is not inside the experiences. The experiences are arising within it. This is what Arjuna saw, not something separate from ordinary experience. The ground of ordinary experience recognized directly. Not the particles, the field. Let the breath return naturally. In October 1929, Werner Heisenberg sat with Rabindranath Tagore in Kolkata and discovered that the territory his equations had been describing had already been mapped. Not by a different science, by a different instrument. The Bhagavad Gita investigated the field from the inside, through direct inquiry into the nature of consciousness itself. Quantum mechanics investigated the same field from the outside, through the behavior of particles at the boundary of what measurement can reach. Both arrived at the same boundary. The field is primary. The observer is not separate from what it observes. What appears as definite and separate arises from an unmanifest ground of potentialities. Heisenberg named the boundary. The Bhagavad Gita mapped what is on the other side. Ancient wisdom, quantum mystery, direct knowing. This is quantum gnosis.